The murder of Gabby Petito is the latest subject of Netflix's true crime anthology series American Murder. While we all know the story by now, the new documentary sheds some light on some previously unknown details, many of which are pretty disturbing. The first of them revolves around text messages. Remember how Brian Laundrie allegedly sent text to Petito's mother, Nicole Schmidt, from his girlfriend's phone after her death? Turns out, these actually weren't the first texts that set off alarm bells in Schmidt's head. The previous texts in question were sent by Petito herself not long before her disappearance, and they hinted at trouble in paradise, something that seemingly wasn't readily apparent before this point.
Brian's stretching, doing some morning yoga.
Responding to her mother asking how things were going, she wrote back, "I'm fine. I convinced Brian to go camp out in the woods so I can have the van to myself. It's what he wants to do. He said I could have the van if I paid him." Of course, this made Schmidt wonder if her daughter was planning to split up with Laundrie and end their trip early. When asked if they were indeed breaking up, Petito wrote, "No, I just said I could make more money as a solo female van lifer." While this likely didn't make Schmidt worry too much at the time, you can still imagine how she felt knowing her daughter was out in the wilderness with a guy that she wasn't getting along with. And in hindsight, it's one of the first notable hints that Petito's van life adventure was careening towards tragedy. Subtle, but very disturbing indeed. The next previously unknown detail has to do with gut-wrenching testimony from a man identified only as Jackson, a former friend and romantic partner of Petito. In addition to detailing his relationship with Petito, he discusses his interactions with her in the days before her death. Jackson says that he and Petito were a couple for a year before she began her relationship with Laundrie, and mentions that they'd even lightly discussed someday taking an off-the-grid van life trip together. On August 22, 2021, Jackson received a text message from Petito, alone for the day and needing to talk. That night, they had a phone conversation that turned concerning when Petito mentioned her plans to leave Laundrie and how she was afraid he might react. 5 days later, Petito sent him a Snapchat message from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to quip that the name of the town reminded her of him. Sometime later, Petito wanted to talk again, but Jackson skipped the call because he was occupied at work. Like everyone else, he didn't learn of her fate until it was broadcast nationwide.
Gabby Petito's body was officially identified today, the coroner now ruling her death a homicide.
It's not hard to imagine the guilt he probably feels knowing that he might have been able to help her in some way. Not that there's a whole lot he could have done from a distance, but still, it's one of those things that could haunt a person forever. The last previously unknown detail concerns Laundrie's actions after the murder. 4 days after the remains discovered in Spread Creek dispersed camping area were conclusively identified as those of Petito, federal authorities issued an arrest warrant for Laundrie, who was already a reported missing person by that point. They also levied a charge of debit card fraud, finding evidence that Petito's Capital One debit card had allegedly been used after her death to the tune of $1,000 worth of transactions, and that Laundrie was the likely culprit. You likely remember this. However, an FBI agent elaborates on this in the documentary and discloses that a significant portion of the fraudulent charges levied by Laundrie came from a Zelle direct funds transfer. Laundrie reportedly used Petito's phone to take $700 out of her bank account and move it into his. In order to make it look like Petito had done it herself, Laundrie included a memo to suggest the couple was splitting up and ending the road trip. The note read, "Goodbye, Brian. I'll never ask you for anything again." Yeah, it's definitely disturbing to know that the text messages Laundrie sent Petito's mom after he'd murdered her daughter wasn't the only time he left fake breadcrumbs to make himself look innocent.